Welcome to SplitSecond. If you want to buy the best sleeves or other magic-related accessories, head down to Dragon Shield using the affiliate link below. This week we bring you the second match from our special Christmas episode. Get ready for the unseen, and in the end we will reveal the winners of our giveaway. Josh finally ended his streak of playing last, however he mulliganed down to 6, keeping a Bloodstained Mire, Mystery Forest and Turn Timber Symbiosis for lands. Mox Diamond and Fellwar Stone for ramp, and Imperial Recruiter helps him pivot his game plan. With all that mana, it's then a matter of abusing Svella. He sent Stomping Ground to the bottom. Bal mulliganed once and found an Overgrown Tomb and Command Tower for lands, with a Sol Ring and a Lighted Halfling for ramp, Red Elemental Blast for some interaction, Brass's Tunnel Grinder to help discard the creatures he wants to give his opponents, while refilling his hand, and Rolly Tutor can help him find one of those or some other stuff like Dockside. David also mulliganed once and kept a Snow-Covered Island and Polluted Delta for lands. With a Burl Druid and Birds of Paradise for ramp, Collector Oof can be crucial in this matchup. Sig River Cutthroat is a decent source of card draw, and Back to Basics can be the final nail in his opponent's coffins. Finally, Elder kept his first 7 with a Lucky Gemstone Caverns, City of Brass and Tiger for lands. Delighted Halfling for ramp, Sarah Ascendant can start pressuring life totals, and Ingenious Artillerist, as you have seen, is a finisher for the Food Chain combo. He's still packing a Swords of Plowshares for removal. Ready for the match? Before the game starts, Elder announces his Lucky Gemstone Caverns, exiling a Taiga. Josh then starts his turn by playing a Bloodstained Mire. He then casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Mystery Forest. He casts a Fellwar Stone by cracking his Bloodstained Mire and searching for a Taiga. The stone happens to be online due to the Gemstone Caverns, but he passes without further things to do. Bal draws, plays a Command Tower and casts a Delighted Halfling, shipping it to David. He plays a Polluted Delta and searches for a Bayou. He casts Birds of Paradise and passes. Elder plays a City of Brass and casts a Delighted Halfling of his own. He still casts Sarah Ascendant and passes. Everyone's packing a lot of ramp on turn 1. Josh casts his commander, Svella, Ice Shaper, and then plays a Dryad Arbor, ending his turn. Bal plays an Overgrown Tomb untapped, paying 2 life, and follows it with a Sol Ring. With 4 mana, he casts the One Ring to rule them all. He activates it to draw a card and passes. David plays a Snow-Covered Island and happily casts a Collector Oof, slowing Josh and Bal a lot. He still ramps with a Boreal Druid, and passes. Elder gets to his turn and jumps into combat. He would like to attack Bal, but the protection from the ring makes him attack David, which is a valid target as well. On the second main phase, he casts his commander, Rocco Street Chef, which triggers right as he goes to his end step, and everyone exiles the top card of their libraries, and they may play them until Elder's next end step. The reveal cards are quite good actually. We're back to Josh. He plays an untapped Turn Timber Serpentine Wood, paying 3 life. While casting Dockside would provide 3 treasures to Josh, due to Rocco triggered ability creating a food, they would be shut down, so he would rather lose Dockside forever and cast his Imperial Recruiter instead. He finds Selvala, Heart of the Wild, so he can have a lot of mana through the big beaters he can find through Svella as the game grinds on. Bal untaps and takes 1 damage from his ring. He still casts his Worldly Tutor in the upkeep, finding himself his own Dockside Extortionist. He draws it, and in his main phase he casts the Slaughter Pact from exile, targeting the Oof, and triggering Rocco to create a food token and putting a +1/+1 counter on the Ascendant. He then activates the ring to draw 2 cards. He proceeds to cast the Dockside Extortionist, entering play and creating 3 treasures. He then plays Boseiju Who Endures and proceeds to cast his commander, the Beamtown Bullies, uncounterable due to the Halfling. He proceeds to attack, sending the Bullies towards Elder to maintain his life threshold rather low. He passes the turn with 5 in hand. David gets to untap and draw without any Bully shenanigans this time. He casts his Sylvan Library from exile, triggering Rocco again, creating a food token and another +1/+1 counter onto Ascendant. David plays an Underground Sea and casts Rhystic Study, yet more card draw. In response though, Bal casts a Thrill of Possibility, discarding an Eater of Days as an additional cost. He draws 2 and Rhystic resolves, ending David's turn. Elder untaps and asks if he can go to his draw step. Bal lets it pass by. Elder then draws, plays a Prismatic Vista and casts his Academy Manufacturer from exile, triggering Rocco and Rhystic, and he cracks his Vista in response to it. Also in response, Bal activates his Beamtown Bullies to attempt to put his Eater of Days from his graveyard into play under Elder's control, since that huge Sarah Ascendant already has a target in sight. Eater of Days triggers and Elder will now skip his next 2 turns. He then finds a forest and pays for the Rhystic. Rocco trigger results, creating another food and putting a +1/+1 counter on the Ascendant. Elder then attacks with a 9/8 Flample towards Josh since it is goaded, and leaves the Ascendant behind to block his opponent's next 9 combat phases. In the end step, Eater of Days is exiled and Rocco triggers. Everyone exiles yet more good stuff from their libraries. With another round of priority on an empty stack, Josh casts an Nature's Claim on David's Rhystic Study, triggering it and paying for it. David ponders for a second and fires his freshly exiled Force of Negation, exiling his Sig River Cutthroat. Rocco triggers, and due to the manufacturer, Elder gets to create a food as well as a clue and a treasure, and pump his Ascendant to a 10-10. Josh now gets to his turn, draws and puts a Cursed Mirror on the stack. Rhystic triggers and he doesn't pay, as he wants to slam Nyx's Bloom Ancient. He might have lost his Dockside, but he got another one from exile. Rocco triggers for another food, clue and treasure, and a +1/+1 counter on Ascendant. Val asks Elder to kill his Dockside, and thanks to the manufacturer, Elder got just that. Enough mana to cast his Source of Plowshares on Val's Dockside, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. With this twist of events, Josh sadly has the mirror enter as a copy of Delighted Halfling, so he can't tap it to cast his Svella. Rhystic triggers and now he can't pay. He then goes ahead and attacks Val for 2, before passing. Val untaps, takes 2 from the ring and pays for his Pact trigger. He draws and activates the ring right away, drawing 3. He now plays a Bloodstained Mire and searches for a Badlands. He then casts his Jessica's Will from exile, targeting David, who has 4 cards in hand but Rhystic about to trigger, as well as Rocco for another clue, treasure, food and a +1/+1 counter on the Ascendant. David draws and Jessica's Will exiles 3 decent artifacts and generates 5 red mana. He uses 2 to cast Collector's Vault, triggering Rhystic and Rocco as well, who cares about cards being cast from exile, not only his trigger. Elder is still somewhat living the dream, despite not having his next 2 turns. Val doesn't pay for the Rhystic and feeds it yet another one with Lotus Petal. Sarah Ascendant is growing huge. Val now activates the Collector's Vault, drawing a card, discarding Leveler and creating a treasure. To spend his last floating mana, he casts Opposition Agent main phase, triggering Rhystic and David draws, and proceeds to combat, attacking Josh for 4 with his commander before ending his turn. David untaps and Val activates Beamtown Bullies to attempt to give him his Leveler in the art. Remember he has Red Blast since the start? Well, David responds with a Veil of Summer, something Val can't counter, so he survives this turn at least. He draws and the Sylvan Library triggers, he just keeps 1 card not paying any life. He plays a Snow-Covered Forest and casts his commander, Jorn, God of Winter. He passes the turn to Josh since Elder skips this entirely. Josh, however, fails yet another land drop, so he's forced to pass. Val untaps and loses 3 to the ring. He draws for the turn, then another 4 from the ring activation. He then casts Brass's Tunnel Grinder, triggering Rhystic and paying for it. It enters play and he discards 4 lands, a Dothy and a Sire of Insanity, which then allows him to draw 7 new cards. He drew no lands though, so he casts a Chromax, triggering Rhystic again and not paying. He imprints Deathrite Shaman and then activates Collector's Vault, drawing, discarding a Mayhem Devil and creating a treasure. He casts Tinderwall, triggering Rhystic yet again and not paying for it. He then goes into combat and attacks David with Beamtown Bullies. Josh mentions that David could block with Jorn, which would allow Josh to deal non-combat damage to the bullies and kill them. Otherwise, Val would simply kill David with the Leveler and Josh is a bit behind in mana. Since Elder is about to skip his turn, David agrees and blocks. However, once Val has priority, he casts a Deadly Rollick on Jorn, before any damage is dealt, hoping to save the bullies from dying. Rhystic triggers and Val doesn't pay. However, David casts a Pact of Negation on it. Val passes priority and it resolves. But this time he shows an uncounterable Abrupt Decay on Jorn. Rhystic once again triggers and Val doesn't pay. The Beamtown Bullies take no damage since the interaction was done in the blocker step, and this way Josh can't kill the bullies. In the end step, Val puts a Boar counter on the Brass Tunnel Grinder and we're on David's turn. He untaps and pays for the Pact trigger. Being now mostly tapped out, Val activates the Beamtown Bullies to attempt to bring Leveler into play under David's control. But this time he succeeds it. As David attempts to draw a card for the turn, he loses to an empty library. In David's end step, Josh activates Svella to create a Manalith, since Elder is still a spectator and we're back to Josh's turn. Josh draws and plays a Yavimaya Cradle of Growth. Finally, he got the mana to slam his Nyx's Bloom Ancient. With it, he's able to tap Dried Arbor for 3 green mana to help activate Selvala, which taps for 15 mana, 10 of which are green and 5 are red, since Selvala allows you to choose any combination of colors, and not just one. Now he has 17 mana total and Void Winnower in hand, but 17 is not enough to cast the Eldrazi and activate Svella, and since the Void Winnower doesn't save him from the Beamtown Bullies strategy, he spins the wheel and activates his commander Svella. He looks at the top 4 and finds a Survival of the Fittest that he casts. Now he's able to fire his Abrade on the opposition agent, but this time Val responds with a Tybalt's Trickery. Josh randomly mills the top 2 cards and exiles a Red Elemental Blast, which he doesn't cast. Josh was prepared to find himself a Seedborn Muse, but that trickery set him way back. Val taps and loses 4 life to the ring. He draws and activates the ring to draw 5 more cards. He plays an Ancient Tomb and then casts an Imperial Seal, finding that he's almost out of options to kill 2 opponents. He finds himself Legless Quick Reflexes, hoping to clear the board with a huge finale for 12 fighting Seeker of Skybreak with haste. However, he might not survive a turn cycle with a 14-14 Serral Ascendant and a ring with 5 bird counters. He casts Cathartic Pyre, discarding 2 cards and drawing 2. He now casts Mana Vault, and using Inverter of Truth on Elder means Elder still has 2 turns, due to having a land and a Source of Plowshares in his graveyard, so that doesn't even prevent Baal from dying to combat damage. The second card drawn by the Pyre was actually a Diabolic Intent that he casts, sacrificing the Delighted Halfling to search for a Seedborn Muse, which he also casts and then proceeds to his end step, putting another board counter on the Brass Tunnel Grinder. Elder finally gets to play with them again. On his upkeep though, Baal activates the ring to draw 6 cards. He still casts an Entomb to find Inverter of Truth into his graveyard. Baal then activates the Beamtown Bullies to attempt to put the Inverter of Truth into play under Elder's control, but in response Elder casts a Noxious Revival on the Inverter. Baal's hope is to find a deflecting sword here, so he responds with a Crop Rotation, sacrificing his Bosejo and finding Bazaar of Baghdad, to hope to dig for SWAT or removal for the Ascendant. He activates the Bazaar, drawing 2 and discarding 3 cards. He still activates Collector's Vault, drawing, discarding and creating a treasure. The Noxious Revival resolves and Beamtown Bullies' ability fizzles. Elder is able to draw normally from his deck after 2 skipped turns. He casts an uncounterable Peregrine Took, which starts to snowball him quite nicely with his Academy Manufactor. But that's not all. Elder now brings his ingenious Artillerist, which hopefully with Rocco's triggers and the Ascendant will be enough to kill Baal. Elder then goes into combat and swings 14 lifelink flying damage towards Baal. In the second main phase, Elder uses Peregrine Took to crack 3 foods to draw a card. Finds and plays a Mystery Rainforest, which at least can tap for green due to Yavimaya. He cracks 3 more foods to draw another card. He finds a Smothering Tithe, which would be really sweet to finish his opponents, but he has no mana for it. Gamble would trigger Rocco for more treasures and put Baal quite low to die to his ring, but Elder prefers not to give Baal the option to tutor with his opposition agent, so he goes to his end step and Rocco triggers. Everyone exiles the top card of their libraries, and this even prevents Baal from using the Inverter on Josh's next turn. Josh and Baal both untap, and Baal activates Bazaar of Baghdad to draw 2 and discard 3. He still activates the One Ring to draw 7 cards. He found the removal he wanted, and casts Assassin's Trophy on Elder's Rocco, because Josh will be able to cast Ragavan from exile, and triggering Rocco to create a food would instead create 2 foods, 2 treasures and 2 clues, triggering the ingenious Artillerist for 6 damage to each opponent. Elder declines the search due to the Oppo, and Josh draws for the turn. He dashes in Ragavan from exile, and then activates Svella looking for a beefy creature, but finds only mana and casts a Sol Ring, which still taps for 6 and helps out on casting the huge Galta Stampede Tyrant. In response, Baal activates the Collector's Vault, drawing a card, discarding a Seeker of Skybreak and creating a treasure. He still casts an Abrade on the Ragavan, as the Winnower eventually had become public information. The Galta trigger resolves and Josh does put the Void Winnower into play. Josh then proceeds to combat, sending all the creatures he can towards Baal. Beamtown Bullies can't block due to the Void Winnower, so Baal casts a Nature's Claim on the Nyxbloom Ancient, and then blocks Selvala and Dryad Arbor. He still goes ahead, firing a Lightning Bolt on Imperial Recruiter, hoping to untap with his Ancient Tomb online. Josh did all he could and passes Hellbent. Baal untaps and his ring triggers to deal 7 damage to him. However, Elder holds him on his horses as he puts a Silence on the stack. David is laughing at this poetic justice. Baal is in shambles. However, like a fish on a boat's floor, he is going to try to fight it off. The biggest problem is his own ring. Baal casts a Corpse Dance, which puts Seeker of Skybreak from his graveyard into play with haste, as it was the topmost creature card. Now he casts Legless Quick Reflexes on it, which if you've seen our latest short, you know what he's about to do. He shows a loop where he taps a Seeker of Skybreak to untap itself, triggering the Legless Quick Reflexes effect to deal damage to a creature, and this way he shoots his opponent's creatures off the board. Without the Void Winnower in play, he is now able to cast his Tainted Pact by exiling a Simian Spirit Guide. He is searching for his Noxious Revival to retrieve Tibalt's Trickery to fight that Silence. However, he finds it third from the bottom. He casts it with the Ancient Tomb being a forest due to Yavimaya. He then activates Bazaar to draw 2 and discard 3 cards, and is able to respond to the Silence with the Tibalt's Trickery. Elder randomly mills 2 and reveals a Quicksmith's Genius that he freely casts. Baal then activates Seeker of Skybreak again to untap itself in order to kill Quicksmith's Genius, and the ring trigger finally resolves, dealing 7 damage to Baal. He goes to his draw step and draws the last card in his library. He plays a Luxury Suite and is forced to cast the Inverter of Truth. Who said that card is just to kill opponents? He turns his team sideways for 11 damage towards Josh and goes to his end step, where he puts the third board counter on Brass's Tunnel Grinder, transforming it into Tecutlan the Searing Rift. He still activates the One Ring to draw 8 cards, and Seeker of Skybreak is exiled. He discards 2 hand size and then taps alongside Elder. On his upkeep, Bal activates the ring to draw 9 cards, looking for a way out, since his deck can't actually get rid of the One Ring. He also activates Bazaar of Baghdad, drawing 2 and discarding 3, and still activates Collector's Vault, drawing a card, discarding a card and creating a treasure. Elder finally gets to play again. He draws for the turn, then, from a cracked clue, he plays an untapped Temple Garden paying 2 life and cracks another clue to find answers, but to no avail. We're back to Josh's turn, and both him and Bal untap. Bal activates the One Ring for 10 cards, and apparently he found a way out. Josh draws, casts Sylvan Library and recasts his commander, Svella, hoping to recoup with both of those cards against Elder once Bal finally dies to his ring. On his end step still, Bal activates Bazaar of Baghdad, drawing 2 and discarding 3, finally finding Nature's Claim again. He now casts Tainted Pact in search for Noxious Revival, which once again is second from the bottom. He now casts Nature's Claim on his One Ring just to gain 4 life. Despite being indestructible, it is a valid target, therefore the spell resolves and he gains a life. He now casts Noxious Revival on his Nature's Claim to be put back on top, and uses Collector's Vault to draw a card, discard a card and create a treasure. With Nature's Claim back in hand, he recasts it now targeting the Collector's Vault, gaining another 4 life back to 11. He proceeds to his turn, untaps, and the One Ring trigger deals 10 damage to him, going down to exactly 1 life. He also draws his last card in the library. He now casts a Praetor's Grasp targeting Elder, hoping he doesn't have Dockside in his hand. He finds it in the library and casts it, entering play and creating 12 treasures. He now casts Delighted Halfling, followed by a Mayhem Devil. He now casts a huge Finale of Devastation X equals 10. Mayhem Devil triggers 10 times and he deals 4 damage to Svella and 6 to Josh's face. This way he can just swing at him with 2 creatures, just in case. He finds Sire of Insanity in his graveyard as he has no library, and this way he gives +10/+10 and haste to all his 8 creatures. He sends 2 creatures towards Josh just in case of removal and all other 6 creatures towards Elder. GG. Now, before we wrap up the highlights of the match, we bring you this great giveaway special sponsored by Dragon Shield. First and foremost, one of our lucky patrons will win this matching playmat and pack of sleeves. And the winner is... Pina! Thank you very much for your support. Another lucky patron will get 2 packs of sleeves of his choice from this bunch. And your waifu pulled it off! Thank you for sticking with us! Now, for you viewers who commented on our last video, one of you will be able to choose 2 packs of sleeves from the remaining options. And the winner is... Dylan Hirko4141, congratulations! And another 2 packs of sleeves now go to one of you who commented and guessed the winner correctly. Drum roll! TRS Ophidian, congratulations! Please get in contact with us through Discord so we can send them to you. Thank you for joining us for today's match, everyone. The One Ring worked the whole match around it, having drawn 55 cards. Not to mention all other looting effects Bal had in play, which literally allowed him to see his whole deck twice, thanks to Inverter of Truth. Veil of Summer bought the Vid a turn, but it wasn't enough to find an answer to the Bullies. Elder had an engine going, and Josh was producing astronomical amounts of mana, only lacking on card draw, up to the point Bal found Seeker plus Legless to wipe the board. Noxious Revival was perhaps the second MVP, saving Elder from being inverted, as well as allowing Bal to find Tibalt's Trickery and Nature's Claim with the help of Tainted Pact. We'd like to start the credits by thanking our current patrons, and especially Izanagi, Arajimo, Drankenhousecat, Pina, Ricardo and Zinan, our stack breakers. If you want to support us, you can do so by liking this video, subscribing or by becoming a patron yourself. If you want to go through other Commander adventures, click one of the videos on the right. If you want to talk with us about our games or other EDH related matters, join us on Discord. Join us again next week for a new set of Commanders and more decisive plays. See you all then.